Yeah, we're live on YouTube now. Perfect. Okay, so just before we start, I think we already have a question which says, oh, which university is okay for medical? I'd say that's a very broad question, and there are loads of considerations usually when you're going about university choices. So what I think we are having a webinar later on specifically for medical as well, which might be quite useful for you for natural sciences, in which we'll have students who are doing more medical stuff. I think, Sandhya, do you have anything to say for this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the major, if we're talking about the UK-US comparison, in the US, if you want to study medicine, you need to do an undergrad before you go on to study medicine. So a lot of people that study biology with me were applying to medical school at the same time. Whereas in the UK, you can go straight into a medical degree. So that's something that's like a consideration. It's also similar for law and some of the other kind of health related subjects that might not be medicine, but veterinary medicine and those kinds of stuff also sometimes have a pre-university degree in the US, but don't in the UK. So that's a consideration if you're trying to decide between the UK and the US and you want to study medicine.
That is quite useful. So essentially, for people who are joining in, you can ask questions. Keep on asking questions during the Q&A, but we're going to divide it into a few parts. Let's just give it a minute or two, and then I'll just introduce the format. We just have more people joining in. Yeah, I think we can get started now. So hello everyone, I'm Aryan, and welcome to the webinar, where we will be comparing universities in the UK and the US, and we will be just discussing these in a few key ways. I will not be your panelist for today. We have a lovely panelist, but first let's go over what Project Access is in the first place and what our agenda is with today's webinar. So essentially, Project Access is an organization whose mission is quite simple. We want to help untraditional students. We know a lot of students can come from untraditional backgrounds. They can come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and it might be difficult applying to university, especially when you're applying to top universities abroad, as many of our panelists are from. And so our mentees, which is people like you, come from untraditional backgrounds, and you need resources and guidance, and that's exactly what we aim to help you with. We do this by offering all of you one-to-one support. So essentially, you will be assigned a mentor once you sign up for our program. And once you receive an offer, you will receive even more support from our campus communities. So I actually work for the campus team. This is something we can talk more about at the end. But with this webinar, we just want to make you feel a bit more comfortable about Project Access and about our mission in general, so that you can get started on this journey and you can get started on thinking about things such as, where to apply, what kind of subjects to think of. And this is the second episode of our series of webinars. So yeah, it is really, really exciting. So just to introduce everyone who we have here, first we have Alex, who is a third-year economics student at UCL. Hi.
Hi, guys.
We have Pooja, who is an incoming second-year engineering student at Cambridge.
Hey, guys.
We have Harrison, who is a history and computer science student at Yale from the US.
Hello.
And finally, we have Sandhya, who's actually been to both the UK and the US. She went to University of California, Berkeley in her year abroad from Edinburgh. So hi, Sandhya.
Hi.
So yeah, so essentially now these people are going to tell us a lot about what it is like to go through UK and the US. So our format for the today is going to be essentially a 30-minute presentation, give or take, followed by loads of questions and a large question and answers round. So keep on giving us the questions. Probably wait till the end just to see whether your question has been answered. And I will be keeping a tab at the Q&A section just to try to answer as many questions as we can. And just if you think your question is directed towards one specific person, feel free to write their name. If not, we'll just try to answer it generally. So yeah, over to the panelists now.
Hey guys, so as you know, I applied to the UK. Before we start this presentation, I just want to say that we will be giving you facts about universities in the UK and the US. However, we're in no way saying that one country is better than the other. It all depends on what's right for you and what sort of what you want and what is your right fit. So to begin with, I'll be talking about the UK application process. So your most important site is UCAS. Basically, everything with your application happens on UCAS. So the first thing that you need to do when thinking about studying in the UK is to find a course you want to study. So be it medicine, engineering, or law, you say, okay, now I want to study engineering, and you go to UCAS and you search for engineering. That'll give you a list of universities where engineering as a course is offered. So once you have that, you can choose up to 5 universities that you want to apply to. But bear in mind that you do need to look at the entry requirements, which are usually grades that you need in your final exams to finally get into the university. So some universities will have an entry requirement of AAA or A-star AA. So just make sure to look at that too. The fourth point is you need to check which application deadline you need to meet. So basically for medicine, veterinary, and Oxbridge, you have to apply in October, whereas for the other universities, you apply in Jan. So do make sure you know whether or not you need to apply in October or Jan. Then the fifth point is you have to write your personal statement, which is very academic and is all about what you want to study and why you want to study. You shouldn't mention any universities in your personal statement. Then the sixth point is you fill out your UCAS application form, which involves your predicted grades and other personal information. Finally, you get a reference from your teacher, which is basically a letter from your teacher talking about who you are, how you interact in an academic setting, and what your interests are. This is, again, a very important part of the process. So I would encourage you to sort of ask your teachers beforehand and make sure you ask teachers who know you very well and are teaching you in the subject area of your choice. Finally, you pay your application fees and you send in your application. Yeah, so now a few important points to note. The application process for most UK universities, other than Oxbridge, is over once you've sent in your applications. However, Oxbridge will also have, when I say Oxbridge, I mean Oxford and Cambridge. They will also have interviews and tests, which we will cover in another webinar on the UK application process. And UK universities give out conditional offers based on your final examination grades. So even once you've got your offers from the universities, you need to make sure that you actually meet your final examination grades if you want to actually enroll in the university. So once you're finished applying, you can track your application through the UCAS track, which is a part of the UCAS website. Once you've received offers from all your universities, you need to choose a firm and a backup choice. So your firm choice is basically the university that if you get the grades required, you will go to. And your backup choice is the university that technically that usually has a lower grade requirement. So that if you miss the offer for your firm choice, you can go to your backup choice. And then your UCAS track will update after you get your exam results, and you will know whether you've gotten to the university or not.
Okay, cool. So the US application process is a little bit different in that you don't need to know what you want to study, and you apply, just as a student to a bunch of universities, and there's various stages to that application process. The first sort of real stage that you'll take part in is standardized tests, which I think most people have heard about. There's two main, there's two types of standardized tests. There's an ACT and an SAT. The difference between the ACT and the SAT is that the ACT includes science. So if you're more scientifically minded, you're probably better trying the ACT. You can do them any number of times you like, but you have to pay each time. And for most of the top universities, you'll then have to do SAT subject tests, for instance, in maths, English, whatever, which complement your application. Once you've done those tests, and ideally got like as high a score as possible, you then start to do your Common App essays, which you'll do over the summer and into the autumn of the year you're going to apply. Pretty similar to the UCAS application, other than it's a lot more personal about you and who you are and what you've done, rather than the exact thing you want to study. I personally did both UK and US applications, and like I thought the US one was a lot harder to really talk about yourself. You go from writing a couple of Common App essays to then individual sort of like questions for each university you want to apply to. Each university has similar but certainly distinct questions that take a bit of time. You can apply to one university, what's called early, which is in October. You apply to that one university and you'll hear back from them in December, mid-December. The rest of the universities you apply to in by the end of December, and you hear back from in March. At the final stage in the application process, which occurs after you've submitted your application or the Common App, but before they get back to you, is an interview. And the interview is very different to an interview at Oxbridge or for medical school or something. It's again much more about who you are, much more personal. It's with a alumni from the university, and it's a less important part of the application compared to the Oxbridge interviews. I think the interviews are mainly a sort of validator for you are this amazing person you've sort of displayed in your application. So once March comes and you've been told about the schools you got into, each school holds some sort of offer day or like offer weekend where they have like mock classes, and you sort of stay on the campus and meet a lot of people, and then you make your decision. And another key difference between the US and the UK is that all the US offers are unconditional. So it doesn't matter what you get in your high school or like your sort of end of year exams and your senior year. Like if they give you an offer, some crazy occurrence, you're going to go to that school in August. And yeah, as it says at the bottom, Project Access really is designed to help you at every step of this journey through webinars and resources and most importantly the mentorship that can give you the advice you need to sort of really stand out each time.
Yeah, so I can be covering the UK finances too. But before I start, I just want to say that finances are very dependent on which university you go to and where you're living in the UK. Because again, London tends to be much more expensive. So yeah, accommodation on average is £125 per week. And tuition for international students can vary between £10,000 to £40,000. So £10,000 is usually if you're doing a literature subject or a subject that doesn't really involve a lot of labs. Whereas it could be closer to £40,000 if you're doing engineering or medicine, because you have a lot of hands-on teaching and a lot of lab sessions. Again, your living cost is hugely dependent on where you live, on which part of the UK you are in, and is usually about £60 per week. So I would encourage you to really look into finances on your own after you've decided which universities you want to go to, because then you'll get a much deeper understanding.
Cool. So I can take the US finances, and I think like a common sort of like misconception about the US is that it's ungodly expensive, which it is, but it becomes a lot less expensive and a lot more manageable when you start to include financial aid. So most of the top universities are private universities with big endowments that are keen to have, you know, the most talented students at their university, and to get those students, they offer what's called financial aid, which is essentially a scholarship based on how much the university believes that you can, or your parents can, afford to pay. So you have to fill out a big sort of form based on, or your parents have to fill out a big form based on, you know, like their income and assets and stuff like that. And the university will come back and say, hey, you know, we think you can pay this amount, and you can dispute that. But for a lot of people, as it says, about 90% of students, that tuition costs are around $50,000 for some of the top universities comes down considerably, you know, in many cases to zero. And the student, you know, you can leave university with no debt, which is something that just doesn't happen in the UK. Another difference between the UK and the US that I think is important to know is that for the US, it's very campus based, especially over the first couple of years of the degree. The degree is 4 years, and for the first 2, you're likely to be on campus. So you have to pay the cost of the room and then the board, because almost all the campuses are catered with, you know, usually pretty great food, at least in my experience at Yale. Once you get through those 2 years, you know, some people move off campus. Depends where you live, really, similar to the UK. Like if you're living in New York, it's probably more difficult to live off campus. But you know, your financial aid package, or the amount like that you are awarded on financial aid, often transfers, you know, with you as you move off campus, and similarly, it transfers with you if you want to study abroad. So, you know, I have plenty of friends who are on financial aid, and they went and studied in Italy over the summer, for instance, and they didn't pay a penny, which is pretty crazy. And again, just something that just doesn't. I don't want to make it a competition between the UK and the US, but it just doesn't happen in the UK. And then the last key difference, I think, is that, like, you know, a lot of my friends who I know who go to Oxbridge and even other universities, like, they're almost actively encouraged sometimes not to get a job and to focus on their, you know, their studies, and that's fine. But there is a key difference in the US where a lot of people will have jobs, and that's something that's encouraged. And you know, the universities employ them. This also applies to like international students. Like the university employs plenty of international students, and they just work that out. So yeah, that's something to bear in mind.
So I'll be taking teaching in the UK. So teaching in UK universities is split up into lectures, tutorials and seminars, and also other subject-specific methods such as labs, if you're a chemistry or biology or physics student, and also practicals for more practical subjects. Subjects tend to be more focused and in depth than the US. So, for example, Harrison studies history and computer science, and that is, I would say, a rarity of a subject combination in the UK. There's also fewer opportunities to study outside your department. For example, in my first year, I got the chance to study 2 elective modules outside of my department. However, that wasn't the case for a lot of friends of mine. Exams also tend to be at the end of the year with fewer midterms and assignments. But once again, this is subject specific. For example, if you study a management course, you will have group coursework through the year, or a history course, you also have assignments through the year, but on average at the end of the year. And also the grading is through an honour system from first to third class.
Great. So I'm going to be taking teaching in the US. I think similar to UK universities, you have lectures. You can also have smaller group discussion sections. This is often led by like a master's or a PhD student rather than your lecturer, and they kind of go through the kind of topics that are discussed in lectures, similar to UK-based tutorials or smaller seminars. And you can also have some subject-specific classes, as we mentioned earlier, like labs and practical classes. Those are pretty similar between the UK and the US in the way those are run. As we mentioned earlier, I think in the US, the range of subjects that you can study is much bigger than maybe in the UK, especially if you're unsure what you want to study. You don't need to say which subject you want to study before you join university. And you can work that out whilst you go there by studying a broader range of subjects. And you'll also have some breadth requirements, which means you have some subjects that you will just have to study that are outside even your major, even if you've decided your major before going into university. However, there are many sets of classes that you might have to pass in order to graduate with a particular degree. You can also graduate with a major in a certain subject and a minor in another subject, and that depends on the prerequisites you have for each of those classes for graduating with those subjects as part of the degree you graduate with. One big difference, I think, between the teaching in the US and the UK is the US have a very continual testing system, which means that you do have multiple midterms and continued class testing, as well as your end of semester exams, which may count a certain percentage towards your total grade. In terms of the grading system, the US uses a GPA grading system, and that goes to a 4.0 or a 5.0, depending on the university you're studying at. So another consideration if you're deciding between the UK and the US is the kind of testing system, which one may suit you better for the way that you study.
So extracurriculars in the UK, there are a diverse range of societies and clubs to join, ranging from departmental societies, which are far more subject specific, to cultural organisations, which relate to sort of national cultures, and then also sports teams. However, there's far less of an emphasis on extracurriculars in the UK. I would say, as a UK student at UCL, I would say 60 to 70% of my time at university is studying, and then the rest is socialising, and a very small proportion is taken up by society commitments, and that's even being part of a society. Sports teams are also less competitive because there isn't, a drafting system like the US. Professional athletes are scouted at an earlier age. However, there is an opportunity to socialise with a culture of socials and sport nights around sports teams in the UK, and this is a great opportunity to meet like-minded people in your sports teams. And I think that's particularly important if you study subjects such as economics, where it can be quite isolating at times because there isn't that much group work. There's also an opportunity to volunteer for charities affiliated with the university, such as Project Access.
Great. So extracurriculars in the US. Again, there's a range of different extracurricular activities you can get involved in. Those can be basically everything that you can think of, from academic societies, different cultural organizations, as well as volunteering opportunities, for example, like Project Access. There's also many opportunities to get involved and start new student organizations or learn new skills, which is also pretty similar in the UK. I think from my experience in the US, there was a lot more societies because sometimes the universities can be a lot bigger, and that's just another kind of aspect to it. But in both instances, there are a lot of ways to get involved in extracurricular activities. Something in terms of extracurriculars that is unique to the US is Greek life. So sororities and fraternities are another kind of way to get involved in student life and to get involved in campus life. And very often people choose to live with people in their sororities or fraternities. So that's a choice that you can take if you decide to go down that route. There's also lots of athletics and sports teams, and that's a really big part of campus life. You can participate in these competitively or recreationally, or you can just go and spectate at events, and that's also a huge part of the kind of culture in the US, is supporting each other and supporting your school. And school spirit is a really big part of your extracurricular activities and the kind of things that you're involved in.
I'll just jump in on the extracurricular stuff just for a sec. Like, just because I actually run on the team, the varsity team at Yale and stuff, and like I think as a general, like if you think from like the application, your application, what gets you into the US schools is like having that sort of that thing that differentiates you from everyone else, and that's not your academics. You know, everyone is pretty good on the academic side of stuff, and that thing usually translates into an extracurricular activity that takes up quite a lot of someone's time at the university, be it sports or music or, you know, yeah, or, you know, coding, whatever. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Cool. No, thank you for that. I will, yeah.
And then final point from me is post-university in the UK. So there are a multitude of career paths for graduates in the UK, many going into finance, law, consulting, as well as public services and non-profits. I think in particularly London universities, there's a real push and pressure to go into sort of finance, law, consulting because of the proximity to the city of London, and the amount of, you know, banking and consulting and law events on campus. The way that graduates tend to get jobs out of university is there's often spring weeks in your first year. These are week-long internships it tends to be law, consulting or banking. However, more recently they're branching out. And then also in your second year, your penultimate year of your 3-year degree, there's also summer internships in which I think there's a broader range of career choices which you can intern in that summer. And then finally, off the back of that, you might be able to get a return offer and a graduate scheme. So that's the sort of pathway for many UK graduates. In terms of applications in the UK, just touching on this briefly, so applications tend to comprise of CVs, cover letters, tests, which include psychometrics, maths, and, you know, verbal and numerical reasoning, multiple stages of telephone and in-person interviews, and assessment days as well.
Sorry, I just want to jump in a bit about the STEM-related opportunities for post-university in the UK. So for STEM, you usually do internships through your first, second, and third year. So for example, at Cambridge, we are even given a certain amount of hours that we need to complete before graduating. So it really depends what subject you're studying. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I can speak a little to the post-university in the US, and I would actually just build off of that point on the which I didn't really consider so much, making these slides on sort of STEM related medical school, you know, graduate schools in the US. You know, many students will sort of start their preparation and application for those schools in their first or usually their second year summer, where they'll start to do internships or lab work if they're trying to go to medical school, you know, or research. And, you know, all the universities really push that. Doing an internship in your second and then third year, you know, before you leave on your fourth is really a big part of the culture in the US. And there's plenty of connections, especially in the top universities, not only between the like different clubs and the firms, but also between the firms and the universities. You know, like the different banks and stuff will have like recruiting teams dedicated to Yale, to Harvard, and these sort of things. They come do pitches and stuff like that. And I think perhaps a really general statement would be that, like, for a lot of industries, the sort of like hubs, you know, of their business are in the US. Be it finance in New York, or you know, tech in Silicon Valley, or, as I said, oil in energy in Houston. Graduating from a university in the US gives you a path directly to that hub, which is very valuable. yeah, internships. They don't do spring weeks. It's usually quite difficult to get an internship in your first year. But you know, it's a 4-year course, so you go from, in your second year, you're looking to get, you know, something, and then most of the you know, at least for big firms, the interns who go there in over the summer for about 10 weeks in the over their third year, so before they go into their senior year, if they do well, they usually be offered a job, and then they're sort of locked in and secure for their final year. Yeah, applications pretty highly dependent on network, and you know, the US is a big place, and they are I think like the days of just sort of knowing someone and getting a place of internship are gone, just because there's just so many top schools and so many people applying for these jobs that you know, it's just not feasible. But yeah, I think like for the strength of the UK system is that if you really know what you're interested in and what you want to study, the UK system allows you to become a real expert in that field, which is very valuable to employers. Whereas you'll leave the US with perhaps a broader set of, you know, transferable skills, which might be good for other jobs. So it depends what you want to go into as well. That's all.
Great, I think that's all from us. So we'll hand back to Aryan to kind of facilitate the Q&A. And all our emails and kind of contact information is on this page. So if you have any particular questions that aren't answered in the Q&A, then feel free to do that.
Yes, that would be very nice. So thank you so much. I think the presentation was really informative, and I hope it answered a lot of our questions, but it definitely didn't answer all of them. So so what I'd suggest is that whoever wants to ask a question just uses the hand raise feature in Zoom and just raises their hand, and I just unmute you and you can ask the question. That would be really nice. And if you don't feel like speaking, or you don't want to turn on your microphone for some reason, that's perfectly fine as well. You can use the Q&A feature instead. So we already have someone who has raised their hands. So let's just, yeah. I'm not sure how to say your name, but you're unmuted. Makh, I guess. Okay. Never mind.
There's actually a question in the Zoom chat as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Does anyone want to take on that?
The question is, how many universities would you recommend to apply to in the US if I'm applying to the UK as well, considering the lengthier application process in the US?
So I
probably
think
could
take
Harrison could take that.
Yeah, I tried to apply to, like, you know, most of the top universities in the UK and then like a bunch in the US, and frankly, it didn't go very well. Like, it's very difficult just over the autumn to do it, because you're preparing for interviews, for instance, at Oxford, and then you're preparing for stuff, you know, while writing all these, like the US one takes, as I said, takes like quite a lot of time. And I think like one person at Yale who got into both like Oxbridge and Yale, and it's possible. So in answer to your question, I would say like maybe two or three, but I would sort of like encourage you to pick a country and like dedicate all of your time to that, and that will sort of maximize your chance of getting in there.
Yeah, I actually have a totally different story. I applied to, I think, 17 universities in the US plus the 5 in the UK. Definitely do not recommend doing that, especially because US is such an intensive process. It sort of drains you emotionally and mentally as well, because you just have to sort of dig into who you are as a person, and that takes a lot of time and effort. But one thing I do recommend you do is, if you are applying to quite a few universities, is when you write down your essays, store them all in one place, because a lot of the universities have very similar questions that you just need to sort of rehash your essays, and you can send similar ones to all the universities. That being said, I definitely limit it to like under 10 in the US if you're applying to both the US and the UK. Again, I was very unsure about what I wanted to study, which is why I also applied to those many universities. But yeah, only take on as much as you think you can handle.
It may be relevant to mention that each university you apply to in the US, there's a cost per university.
Right.
Not just like in your time, there's also like a financial cost. So, you know, like
but again, I think you can get that waived if you have certain.
Oh, really? Okay, that's. I mean, that's.
I'm not entirely sure. I'll probably look into that, but yeah, I think if you, I'm not sure though.
Yeah. So one, I think we have two questions which can be in a way are trying to talk about the same thing. The first thing is, is it possible for us to study in the US for free? And the second question is some kind of insights into how you go about getting a scholarship in these universities, which I would assume is both for the US and the UK. So maybe we can have one of you take on US and the other one take on the UK. How do you go about getting scholarships? Is it possible to study free in any of these universities? And how do you normally manage your finances?
Yeah. I can have a go at the US one. Can you study in the US for free? Yes, you can. We certainly don't need to ask you, you know, any details on your sort of finances. Basic. I sort of a basic way of figuring out if you probably will study for almost for free or nearly for free is look up how much it costs to study at the university you want to study, and then add like 20% on the top of that, 25% on the top of that, and then if your sort of family makes less than that per year, then you are almost certainly going to study for free at that university. In terms of scholarships, like I think I want to clarify like that, like a lot of people talk about scholarships for the US, and that you can get scholarships for certain schools, but most of the sort of Ivy League schools and, you know, other top universities, they don't really offer scholarships. Because they sort of act on the assumption that sort of everyone who gets in would be deserving of a scholarship because everyone's very talented at something. So, you know, we just give sort of financial aid to them based on how much they need it.
Sorry, on that point, actually quite a few universities do offer merit-based scholarship. So especially I applied to a few design schools too that sort of automatically offer merit-based scholarship too, depending on your ACT scores and your portfolio and your grades, etc. So it's again very university dependent, and you should look into it when you decide what universities you want to apply to. Yeah.
Yeah, and any insights into the UK application process and possibly getting scholarships?
I mean, I could try and answer this one because I'm trying to look into scholarships for master's applications, but I can imagine it's quite a similar process. First of all, a lot of organizations such as insurance companies and banks offer scholarships to students based on you know, their financial situation. There's also scholarships for merit as well at a number of top UK universities. But I think the best thing to do is to look on each university's website because scholarships, I think, are highly dependent on which university you go to. And also there's a lot of diversity scholarships as well at UK universities. That's all I can add.
Follow on from that, and it's kind of related to the question in the chat about scholarships for non-EU students at Oxbridge that would like to go to a PhD program. My advice would be to go onto the specific PhD program on the website and find out if there are any scholarships advertise on that. And if there's not, get in contact with the organizer of the PhD program or the organizer of the courses that you might be interested at these universities, because they'll have further information on whether particular universities offer scholarship for non-EU students, for example. So I think some things are dependent, especially at maybe at the PhD or master's level. So do some more digging into specifically the course that you're trying to study and whether there is those opportunities there, because it will vary a little as well.
Mm-hmm. So I think in summary, it would be a very good idea if you are interested in scholarship opportunities, because a lot of it depends from where you're applying and where you're applying. So, and for these specific cases, that's exactly why you should apply as a mentee with Project Access, because you will be given a mentee who is presumably from your country and for your target university. At least that's what we try to do. So having that kind of match would be extremely helpful, and they would be able to give you much more specific advice. I think the next question we have is, how intense simply is the admission process for the UK?
I don't mind. Okay, yeah, sorry, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I can start with that. In terms of intensity, so I didn't apply to any US-based universities. I only applied to UK ones. And I think it does depend the kind of course that you're applying for and where you're applying for. I think Pooja mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but Oxbridge, veterinary sciences and medicine all have early admission. That means that you have to send in your application in October. And following on from this, you may have some interviews, you may have admissions tests, you may have other things you have to do, especially for medicine, before you apply as well, other types of testing, similar for dentistry, I think. So the intensity of the process, I think, really does depend on the universities you're applying to and the courses you're applying for. But if you're applying for a different course, I applied for biology, and you're not applying to Oxbridge, you do have till January. And the process is centralized. The UCAS system that Pooja mentioned before means that you don't have to apply to each university individually. And that definitely, I think, makes the process kind of less intense than the one that Harrison described, where you have to do a specific application for each university. You have to pay for each application. In terms of UCAS, it's a one-off payment and you apply to 5 universities at one time. So in terms of comparing the intensity between the UK and the US, I would say that the UK one is definitely less time intensive, depending on the course that you're applying for and the universities you're applying to. I don't know if anyone has anything.
Yeah, sorry, just for the Oxbridge process, because yeah, so most of the other universities, it's not as time intensive as the US, but if you apply to either Oxford or Cambridge, you do have a lot more steps that you need to take. So for example, during my application process, after submitting the application, I had to write a pre-interview test, which again depends on what subject you're applying for and which college in Oxford you're applying to. But I had one test that I had to write in my home country, and then I had to go to the UK for an interview. Sometimes they sort of let you do the interview from your home country, but that again depends on your course and your college. So in the UK, I had an interview and I had 2 tests, which again, very different based on what you're applying for and which college you're applying to. But yeah, you definitely will have at least 1 pre-admissions test and interview, and possibly another 2 tests once you're in the UK, all before you get your offer.
Mm-hmm.
Just adding, can I just add one last thing on that? I think the intensity happens at different times for the UK and US applications. I think the application itself is probably more intense for the US, obviously, who you just talked about, Cambridge and Oxford being quite intense. But for UK applications, unless you're an extremely exceptional student, they are, if you get an offer, it's conditional. So the stress then comes at the end of the year in your second year of A-levels, when you have to meet your offer, which for a top UK university tends to be quite high. So that particular moment in time is incredibly stressful. But yeah, that's all I want to say.
Yeah. So the next question I think is specifically for Harrison, and it says that, what do you think is the best time to apply to US universities for international students?
Sorry, where is that?
It's in the Q&A section.
So what, like in terms of time, like what is that?
As in, when do you think it's should you start applications an year prior to starting university, or maybe
Okay.
even before that? So when do you start thinking about,
Yeah.
let me give
Sure.
my SATs and stuff like that? Yeah.
Yeah. So the easy answer is like as early as possible, and there is certainly a difference between the UK and the US with this, because of the importance of your extracurriculars in your application. So it's obviously very difficult to build out a pretty like not a broad spectrum of extracurriculars, but like a developed sort of story behind you around like, this is what I do and these are all this sort of stuff I'm passionate about. Like if you don't start thinking about that stuff like a couple of years, I guess, in advance. In terms of the real application, like writing it, doing the tests, like I think encouraging people to start taking the tests from like a year prior to applying. So maybe you start them in January, and then you maybe submit an early application in October, and your final application the next January. That is I think that's what I would advise, just because you can take those tests like as many times as you like. And then I would say start writing the common application essays and the university application essays over the summer before you apply. That's probably best practice. And then the reason I asked about like times was just because there is certainly, I think, an advantage to applying early to a school that you really, really want to go to, because you only get to apply to one school early in October, and doing that and making that school your early application sort of shows them that you are really passionate about that school, and that's your top school. So there is certainly value in preparing ahead.
Sorry, actually, for the early application, there are two different types. You have your early decision and early application. So early decision is what Harrison was talking about. You only apply to one university, and if you get into that university, you sort of have to go there. However, early application is you're applying to the university early and you're showing interest, but if you do get in, you won't have to go to the university.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really helpful. Just for context, again, I keep on saying this again and again, but Project Access, for example, we open up program 1 to 2 years in advance for US applicants, and sometimes even further earlier. So if you're already interested, it makes absolute sense for you to already sign up as a mentee, and then you can already get started on the process, whether it's for the US or the UK. The next question we have from Jean, who asks, what are the opportunities to work when you finish your study? So let's be a bit, because we have loads of questions waiting for us, so let's be quite specific about the US and the UK. So maybe Sandhya and Alex can take this question.
So in terms of where there are more opportunities to work when you finish your studies, I think it's pretty similar probably in the UK and the US in terms of like, there's lots of opportunities wherever you go. I think one benefit about the US in terms
Let's see, I think Sandhya broke up.
Yeah.
Alex, maybe you can start till then.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just echoing what Sandhya just spoke about. As far as I'm aware, there's a fairly equal amount of opportunities. Just to touch on what Harrison said earlier, though, I think in the US, I think particularly going into professional services and that sort of career path is far more based on your connections and your network in the US. Rather in the UK, I think it's a fairly standard application process of sending off your application and then CVs, interviews and assessment days and stuff like that. Having said that, I think particularly in London, there are established industries in finance, law, consulting, as well as non-profits as well. However, I think there's far less of an established tech industry. So if you wanted to go into tech, I think San Fran or Bay Area in the US is somewhere you probably want to go.
Yeah, Sorry, I think my connection cut a little. Yeah, I was just saying in the US that there's a lot of different, the benefit compared to the UK, I think, is there's a lot of different hubs for different areas that Harrison kind of touched upon. And it just means that there are multiple offices for certain companies, for example, that you could apply to, whereas in the UK, London tends to be the main hub of where you could live and work if you're looking at specific industries. So that's like another consideration. But in terms of opportunities, I think the UK and the US both have wonderful work opportunities, but there just might be more places that you could live in the US, for example.
The next question we have is, this is quite specific from Jose, which is, how much time does it get to be accepted in the US?
I mean, I guess I can take this. So, short answer is like 3 months. So, you know, you apply, you apply in the end of December, and then you'll be told at the start of I think it's start of March. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pooja. And then the same sort of story for both the early application, the early decision things where you apply in the fall, and they then tell you in December.
Yeah, and I believe it's similar for the UK as well. You usually get to know whether you succeeded or not within, say, 3 months or so. The next question is, if I want to study a master's program, in which country between the UK and the US are there more opportunities to get a scholarship? Again, loads of scholarship questions.
I can start with this one if you want, and then I can pass on to Alex if you have any thoughts. I think in terms of programs in the UK specifically, there's definitely lots of scholarship opportunities, especially when compared to undergrad. In the UK, I think undergrad scholarships aren't as common as maybe in the US, but in terms of a master's program, there are lots of foundations that do sponsor students, because UK-based students as well often can get sponsorship and scholarship for their master's programs. So I don't know if someone knows about the comparison between both, but I can talk about the UK being pretty open in terms of having more scholarship programs at the master's level. I don't know if Alex, if you have any more insight into that.
No, I don't think I do. I think you've pretty much covered it for the UK.
For the US, I would specifically recommend joining our UK in-depth and US in-depth webinars as well, where we will be covering more of these specific questions regarding these specific countries. So we actually had a few questions come in from email as well, which are quite interesting. So, and they're fun ones as well. So I think the first one is, what are the differences in accommodation? So what do you think are the key differences between accommodation in the US and the UK, and why would you prefer one over the other?
Oh,
I believe you've lived at both places, so maybe you can start this with. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I lived in the US, I actually didn't live in campus accommodation. I lived off campus like you would in the UK. I think this also varies depending on university, and that's my kind of perspective. I'm sure Pooja and Harrison have their opinions on this, but very often Oxford universities, you do have to stay in their accommodation for the whole duration of your undergrad degree. At Edinburgh, we have university accommodation in our first year, and then we move out into kind of apartments or flats after that. Whereas in the UK, I know Berkeley students in their first year, most if not all stay in their dorms on campus, which also have food and catered services as well. In my first year in Edinburgh, accommodation wise, I didn't have catered services. So in the UK, I think there is an option in terms of accommodation, whether you want to go for a catered kind of living situation, or if you do want to go for one where you cook yourself and have kitchens and the ability to do that. So really depends, depending on the place and the type of university.
Yeah, so to add to that, as Sandhya said, for Oxford, we usually have to stay for the whole 4 year for our undergrad degree. And we don't really have, say, a catered, not catered option. We sort of have a survey and you just pay every time you go. Yeah.
There's maybe one thing I would like to add on this. It's not really anything, I completely agree with what was said, But one thing you have to bear in mind with the US that people will sometimes forget is that it's a really big country and there's lots of different types of weather. So like if you don't like snow, then you need to bear that in mind when you apply, because there's some places where half the year it's really cold and there's a load of snow. And like that really does, obviously that does affect like your life a little bit, but it depends on the person.
If I may slightly just add to that, just to clear a few things, that on-campus accommodation is when you're living in accommodation provided to you by the university, and then off-campus is when you just go with your friends and then you just look for flats in a nearby city. So like that was something I was not familiar with before applying to university, and like it was a very interesting experience just looking for accommodation in my second year, trying to understand how I will be living. About being catered, I think one key difference is also that in the UK you can find a lot of most rooms are single rooms, so you're not really having shared rooms where you share a room with a partner. So you would usually have your own room, and you can also have an ensuite, which is having your own personal bathroom attached to the to your room, although that's less common. But in the US it's usually shared dorms, if I'm not wrong.
You're not wrong.
I completely missed that. Yes, I had a roommate for the last year. Really common in US to have like doubles or triples, where you have multiple people that share a room and share communal spaces. Whereas in the UK, like I've always had a single room. Whereas there are some doubles opportunities, but in general, people have their own room in the UK. Whereas in the US, you'd be expected to share a room.
Yeah, my experience in the US is I have had a roommate for the past 2 years, and it was interesting.
It's an interesting thing.
All I'm going to say is not having a shared room, I appreciate that a lot. Having an ensuite, I appreciate that a lot. Being in the UK.
Ensuite was just like, I'm like, I need the ensuite. Just the thought of walking out in a towel and then walking back in.
Having a roommate can also be very fun. At the same time.
No, I think like for me, like having a roommate the first year was fantastic. And like different universities do the accommodation thing differently, like at Yale, and I think at other places like they have a system which is called like suites, where you have like a few rooms with 2 people per room around like one sort of common room, and that gives you quite a nice little network of people to go around with and talk to as you go through the challenges of like the first year. And then from there, some people get singles, some people get doubles, and then by your third year and final year, most people are in a single or they're off campus.
Yeah. So the next
on the accommodation stuff as well, I think I know we've been talking about this for a while, but living on campus or living in on-campus accommodation is a really great way to meet people in your first year, especially if you don't really know anyone who you're going to university with. I know some people do choose to stay off campus right from the very start, but would recommend staying on campus accommodation just because it's a wonderful way to meet a huge number of people which you otherwise wouldn't get.
Yes. Now the next question again from email is rather specific, and it would be amazing if all of you could give one sentence, and that is, what do you like best and least about studying in specific countries? So like, the UK for Alex and Pooja, and the US for Harrison, and probably both for Sandhya. What's your best thing about studying in the UK, and what's your favorite thing about and least favorite thing about studying in the UK/US?
I go first for this one. So I would say my favorite thing about studying in the UK, and particularly London, is the level of diversity. Like in my course, I would say 60 to 70% of my course are international students. However, I think the drawback is living in London, everything's really, really expensive. So yeah, not good on the finances.
So I guess for me, UK, I think I'm happy studying just what I want to major in, and I definitely would not appreciate having to write essays in history or English or whatever other subject. So I'm very happy about that. However, I guess the disadvantage is that, at least I think, as Alex said before, I think in tech, US is probably a better place for jobs. So I guess that's probably one disadvantage, I'd say, for now.
I can go. So for me, like, I'm sort of person who does like writing essays in, for history, and then doing some sort of like STEM stuff as well. And I was never one of those kids who like really knew what I wanted to study when I was like 16, 17. And I sort of still don't. And I think the US, my favorite thing about the US is just being able to study such a broad range of topics. Like even at Yale, when you major in something, that takes up about a third of the thing of what you're going to study while you're at Yale. The rest of the other 2/3 are like stuff that you're interested in, which I think is really, awesome and empowering in later life. I think for me, I guess the worst thing about studying in the US is, like, I guess like the distance, just, like the fact is that if I was studying in the UK, which is where I'm from, I would be able to like see my family come home probably a little bit more often. Like I can only come home, 2 or 3 times a year from the US, and it would be nice to teleport.
Yeah, to finish up, I can do a quick sentence from both. I think so my favorite thing, a good thing about being in the UK is that it's much smaller. It means that it's much easier to get to different places. Like to get from Edinburgh to London, it's pretty quick, but getting San Francisco to New York is pretty big distance. It means it's easier to kind of travel around, and that's the kind of benefit, I think. The negative, I think, of being in the UK is it's much colder. I spent a year in California. The weather was amazing, really sunny, loads of beaches, that kind of fun stuff. Edinburgh is kind of cold and a bit rainy and wet. But it's still really beautiful. But I think that would be the kind of negative part of it. I think the US, I really appreciated the extracurricular kind of activities and the loads of ways that you can kind of get involved in like school spirit and school life. I think if I needed to pick like a negative, I'd probably say it's all like there's a lot of testing throughout the year, and it means that you have to consistently be like working hard a lot all the way through the year. You can't just wait till the last couple of weeks to kind of really get into study mode. You kind of have to be in study mode the whole time. That's something to kind of consider if you're kind of weighing up between the UK and the US kind of system.
Yeah, thank you so much.
There are a few questions here in the Q&A.
Yes, that's literally that's what I'm coming to next. So I think the first question we have is from Sahane, and she's asking whether it is possible to study in the US, study medical in the US without giving the SAT's common essay. I don't know whether Sandhya you can answer that one, but in general, I think this would depend on what university you're applying for.
And I think also like I don't know if Harrison's a better person to answer this, but I don't think you can even study medicine in the US without having an undergrad first. So like the SATs and like the common essay and those kind of parts of the application process Harrison talked about is what you would need to do your undergrad degree in the US. And I don't think you'd be able to study a medical degree without first doing a 4-year undergraduate or a 3-year undergraduate in the UK first.
No, you're completely right. Like the process for getting into medical school requires probably a lifetime of webinars. But the short answer is that you need to, as you said, you need to go to undergraduate. We can dig in a little bit to whether you need your SAT to do undergraduates, because that is sort of changing for certain universities. But you will have to do the Common App. Like that's just a given.
Yeah, that again depends. Some universities don't go through the Common App. Like Berkeley and all the UCs are separate. I think MIT is separate too. So again, you'd have to sort of check which universities you can apply to through the Common App and which to apply to separately.
I think in general, because these things can be quite confusing, applying as a mentee, this is especially where it's quite helpful, because you will get someone who is studying medicine in the US, who'd be able to guide you through all of this. I would also recommend joining our webinars on UK in-depth and life sciences, because then you'd have some people who are ready to talk about even more specific things, I guess. So yeah. The next question we have is, how do we think the current COVID-19 situation would affect university life in both the US and the UK? So maybe we can start with Alex. How do you think COVID-19 would affect university life in the UK?
It's interesting because I think it was yesterday, Rishi Sunak said that they're going to open up pubs and restaurants, and then clubs will follow soon. However, I really don't know. I think freshers is not going to be like freshers should. I don't think clubs will open in September. I think a lot of the bars and restaurants are still, I think you need to socially distance outside. So I think, unfortunately, next year, student life won't be back to what it should be or what is normally, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of lectures, so we probably will have online lectures, but we will be living on campus and have sort of smaller face-to-face sessions and labs. At least that's what we've been told at the moment. But again, nothing is really set in stone.
Yeah, to follow on from that, I think it really depends on the universities at the moment. I know that, for example, Edinburgh have issued a statement saying that our university will open, but Berkeley is preparing more for a hybrid semester in which some people might not be able to return to the campus based on restrictions by their country or restrictions based on where they're coming from. And that means that they're trying to transition to a sense that they could have a lot of stuff online and then some things in person, but no one's really sure what that's going to look like yet. So I think it's very unpredictable in terms of teaching what that's going to look like. And I think university life is definitely going to change for any students that are going into university in the upcoming years when compared to like years before, just because of the COVID situation.
Is there anything specific, do you think, in the US, or do you think it's quite general, Harrison?
I think it's hard to predict. Like I think by and large, like a hybrid system or something like Cambridge are planning, where big lectures are online, but smaller sort of seminars and tutorials take place in big classrooms, socially distanced. That would be, I think, the best case scenario. But you know, there are certain schools that like are just going to go online for the rest of the year. I would potentially suggest we do we have a question about Brexit in the questions?
I don't think we do, but go ahead.
Like, this is just a similar sort of, I think, like, actually, like, how does a COVID situation affect the UK and the US, and then also how does Brexit affect the UK and US? Because I'm pretty sure like EU students especially get like a lot of benefit from Britain being in the EU, coming to the UK to study, which might sort of disappear with Brexit, and then the US might be a little bit more appealing to them. That was what I was going to say on that.
I mean, just to add a little bit to this, for me, my term 3 has been online as well. So normally I study at Warwick, but my term 3 has been online, and you can definitely notice seminars online are not of the same quality, and like I definitely miss being on campus. But at the same time, I think the compromise which most universities have announced, which is the case for Warwick as well, which is to have lectures online, but having in-person seminars, because I think at least in universities, the seminars I value the most. Oftentimes you can just view the lectures online anyway, so you might just miss the lectures, but having those seminars are quite important, and having those in person could be extremely helpful. So in that sense, I think that's a positive note to end on, probably, that there is something to look forward to, and hopefully campuses do at least partially open up this September. And so I hope everyone found this quite insightful. Like we mentioned, we have a number of webinars planned. And if you're interested in specific subjects, or if you're interested in knowing more about specifically the UK or the US, you should be looking out after our social media and our webpage, which you will be emailed again, which is just projectaccess.org/accessacademy. If you have any feedback, any way you think we can improve, you can email either Marlon or me, Arun. And if you have any specific questions about applying to these specific universities, you should definitely email anyone. I'm sure all of our panelists have answered a lot of questions and would be more than happy to answer more questions over email. So yeah, and definitely consider registering as a mentee with Project Access. It is extremely rewarding, and we have a program actually starting extremely soon. So if you join in like 3 or 4 days, that would be quite nice, because you would be part of a class. Essentially, you would still be given personal mentees, but then you would have a framework to go about, which can be quite rewarding again. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining. Thank you so much to our panelists as well.
Thank you, Arun,
Bye.
for hosting
Thank
the
you.
whole thing.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.